Hi, Bible scholars. Are you beginning to feel like one? I hope so. Welcome to Always on Bible with Glenda Johns. Did you click that subscribe button and like button? I hope you're making it a point to share. Why not make it a ministry? This series of teaching is called A Fresh Look at Revelation with Glenda Johns. That's me. I'm hoping that you might consider getting the book that this series is based on called Revelation Chronologically. It goes into greater detail and you'll find it most helpful in your studies. I'm delighted to have you join me in this episode 5, After the Rapture, and we'll also include the introduction of the scroll. Of the 3 events that follow the rapture of the church, we have covered the first one, which is the immediate formation of the tribulation church. The second event to occur is the Battle of Gog and Magog. This battle is described in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. This vision of Ezekiel tells us that God will cause Russia to agree with many nations of the Middle East, like Iran, Ethiopia, and Libya, and, quote, many others, to band together with the intent of destroying the nation of Israel and exterminating all Jews. These nations joining Russia are usually mostly Muslim nations who believe it is the intent of their God, Allah, to kill all Jews. Now keep in mind that this battle cannot occur before the rapture, else we would be looking for it and not the coming of Christ for his church. Also, the battle is not mentioned in Revelation, so it must occur before the onset of the 7 years. Russia is always eager to conquer, so an alliance with these Muslim nations fits her agenda well. Ezekiel said these armies will ascend upon the land of Israel like a storm to take them as prey, but God's fury will come upon them. You see, there's no nation left on earth after the rapture who will come to Israel's aid. So that is when God steps down from heaven to save his people. Ezekiel says God will rain hailstones, fire, and brimstone upon these armies as they surround Israel. The victory for Israel will be certain, complete, and all military leaders of Russia and the Muslims will die. This brings us to the third event that will occur after the rapture, but before the onset of the tribulation. There is no mention in the book of Revelation concerning the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem by the Levite Jews. Revelation only mentions that the temple is there. With all Muslim leaders gone, the Jews will suddenly be led to begin to erect their temple, which I understand could be accomplished in only months. The next 5 chapters in Ezekiel after the Battle of Gog and Magog are detailed plans for a temple that fits neither the temple erected by Solomon or Herod. It is no doubt the plan that the Jews will use to build the temple in Jerusalem before the tribulation. The Jews have all the necessary materials for this project. They're just waiting on God. The Muslim Dome of the Rock will probably be destroyed so that this temple can be built on the exact same site as was proposed by God. This will be easily accomplished after the death of the Islamic leaders. The Muslims are not mentioned, as I said, in the book of Revelation. We now have completed 3 events that will happen right after the rapture, but before the onset of the 7-year tribulation period. Let's turn our attention now back to John. We last saw him arriving quite suddenly in heaven and standing before the throne of God. His description of the throne contains only the mention of precious jewels, none of which fit into the vocabulary of geologists today. That's probably just as well, for the beauty that John's eyes behold is beyond description. This is where he actually sees the 7 spirits of God we talked about previously. They are depicted to him as lamps before the throne. That would be quite an appropriate symbol, for that it is the 7 spirits that shed light of truth into our spirits. Remember, this is all a vision to John, so there are symbols. I want to add here my complaint with the church for identifying our God as a trinity of 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. First, when we say person, we always think of a being consisting of a body, a soul or mind, and a spirit, right? Well, God does not have 3 bodies, 3 minds, and 3 spirits. So I much prefer to describe our God as one person having a body, who is Jesus, the Son, a soul, who is the Father, with plans and intents, and a spirit, namely the Holy Spirit, who communicates to and with God's people. John also sees 4 living beings called animals in the original Greek that are circling the throne. Someone has suggested these 4 animals represent the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who gave us 4 views of the human being God became when he came to earth. Interestingly, it is these 4 animal beings who will also be used to introduce the Antichrist to John. The third thing he sees are 24 elders who are sitting on thrones before and around the throne of God on which Jesus sits. Now let me be clear here. Throughout the book of Revelation, John never sees more than one throne. It is always, and it must be, Jesus who sits on that throne. For God the Father is a spirit who cannot sit. The only part of the Trinity that we will ever see is Jesus Christ. Did I say that John never sees more than one throne? I meant the throne of God. He now sees 24 more thrones. Who else sits beside the king on a throne? It's the queen, his wife, of course. Now, let's get back to those 24 elders who are also sitting on thrones. Now, you've probably guessed my logic. Because they sit on thrones, and they are the only ones in heaven that do, they must represent the bride. For pray tell, who sits on a throne beside the king? His bride, his queen, of course. These 24 elders are made up of 12 Jews, represented by the 12 tribes of Israel, and 12 apostles, who are the founders of the Gentile church, both groups, Jews and Gentiles, of which make up the bride. Don't forget that, for there will be more said about that later. John next notices in the hand of the one on the throne a scroll. John always avoids calling the one on the throne Jesus. He just cannot. You might want to ask him about that when we get to heaven. We are now covering chapter 5 of Revelation. This chapter reveals a perfect picture of the Trinity. That means it is very confusing. So if you feel confused when you read it, congratulations. Don't worry. None of us can really understand the Trinity. We are human. God is of the spirit world. He is a spirit. He has a body. And in this chapter 5, we have the body communicating with the spirit back and forth, and it becomes confusing. But the scroll has a problem. John looks at the one which you will remember is Jesus sitting on the throne with a scroll in his hand. Oh, but it may not be Jesus. Just wait. John is told that there is no one in heaven or on earth who is qualified to open this scroll. When he is told this, John cries. Yes, he weeps. He must know that the scroll contains God's judgment on Satan. And if Satan is never judged, that means he wins. That must be why John weeps. And thus ends this episode. You don't want to miss the next episode 6, when we talk about the contents of that scroll and the problem it presents. Before leaving now, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this good news with someone you love.